Chapter 1. The rain-soaked getaway. The rain didn't fall in drops, but in a fine, persistent mist that blurred the world into a watercolor of gray and green. It beaded on the wool of Leo's overcoat and glossed the cobblestones of the ancient port city, turning them into a pathway of dimly shining pearls. He stood under the awning of a closed baker's shop, the scent of yesterday's bread mingling with the salt tang of the sea. There was no panic in him. Not anymore. The frantic sprint from the city, the betrayal that still tasted like copper in his mouth, the gunfire that had echoed through the financial district. It was all a distant echo here, muffled by the gentle shush of the rain on the harbor water. This was not a flight, it was a transition. A careful, deliberate step from one life into the shadows of another. He watched the ferry, a hulking silhouette against the steel, wool sky disgorge its passengers. They scurried like ants, collars turned up, heads down, eager to be out of the damp. Leo's eyes, the color of flint, scanned them without urgency. He was waiting for a sign. Not a waved hand or a flashed light, but an absence. A break in the pattern. His hand rested in his pocket, not on the cold weight of the pistol nestled there, but on a single, smooth stone. A worry stone, worn flat by a lifetime of contemplation. His father's. A man who had solved problems with quiet words, not loud actions. Leo had strayed from that path, building a louder, brasher empire. And louder empires, he had learned, have louder falls. A man in a fisherman's sweater, his face a roadmap of wrinkles earned by wind and sun, paused to light a pipe under the eaves next to him. The match flared, a tiny, fleeting sun in the gloom. He took a long pull, and the sweet, earthy scent of good tobacco cut through the damp air. The sea Sprite leaves with the tide, the man said, his voice a low rumble like stones tumbling in the deep. He didn't look at Leo. Captain's a friend of the family. He appreciates quiet cargo. Leo didn't turn his head. And the family appreciates quiet passages. The old fisherman gave a nearly imperceptible nod, the pipe clenched in his teeth. Berth 7. The crate marked machinery parts. It's dry. There's a blanket. And a book. He finally glanced at Leo, his eyes surprisingly sharp and clear. The boss said you'd appreciate a book. A ghost of a smile touched Leo's lips. Elara. She thought of everything. The empire he had built with muscle and ambition, she was now preserving with silence and foresight. She was the quiet kingpin, holding the center while he escaped the periphery. My thanks, Leo said, his voice barely a whisper. He pushed off from the wall, merging with the shadow of a nearby warehouse. The exchange was over. No names, no money handed over, just the fulfillment of an old debt, honor bound and silent. He found berth 7. The sea Sprite was a sturdy, workmanlike trawler, smelling of diesel, fish, and tar. Lashed to the deck was a large wooden crate among many others. One, as promised, was stenciled with Amkinawi parts, Fragee. He glanced around one last time. The mist clung to everything, hiding secrets, offering solace. He opened the latches on one side of the crate. It was well, oiled and silent, and slid inside, pulling it closed behind him. Darkness. But not empty darkness. As promised, there was a thick wool blanket, and his fingers brushed against the leather binding of a book. He settled into the space. It was not comfortable, but it was safe. Outside, he heard the low thrum of the engine starting, felt the vibration through the deck. The boat began to move, a gentle, rocking rhythm. The sound of the rain became a soft drumming on the wooden lid above him. He was escaping. But for the first time in days, his mind was not racing toward the future. It was settling. The rhythm of the sea, the smell of the old wood, the feel of the book in his hands. It was a lullaby. Leo, the lion, Mentoni, whose name had once sparked fear across a city, closed his eyes, and in the dark, rolling belly of a fishing boat, he slept. Chapter 2a. The keeper of the quiet café. 3 weeks later, in a different part of the city, a bell above a door chimed softly. The city was awake now, buzzing with its own frantic energy. But here, in this small café tucked down a narrow alley, time moved differently. Elara Vesper stirred a cup of tea, the steam curling in the air like a languid ghost. She was a woman of poised elegance. Her dark hair swept into a neat chignon, her clothing simple but exquisitely cut. To the occasional tourist who wandered in, she was the serene owner of the Whispering Bean, a place known for its excellent coffee, rare teas, and absolute peace. The walls were lined with books, and the only music was the gentle hiss of the espresso machine and the low murmur of conversation. They did not see the calculus happening behind her calm gray eyes. With every sip of tea, she was processing information. A young couple in the corner, sharing a pastry. Were they just in love, or was the man nervously awaiting a drop-off? The deliverman who brought the pastries each morning. Was his route slightly altered? His demeanor a fraction too tense? A man in a well-tailored suit entered, shaking rain from his umbrella. He took a seat at the counter. Marco, one of Leo's, no, her, lieutenants. He ordered a double espresso. His knuckles were grazed. Rough morning, Marco? Elara asked, her voice a soft melody. She placed the small cup before him. The Varelli boys. Marco muttered, keeping his voice low. Getting ambitious. They tried to move into the protection racket on Cypress Street. There was odd discussion. Elara's expression did not change. She polished a glass with a clean white cloth. And what was the resolution? We reminded them that Cypress Street falls under our understanding with the old Sicilian who runs the grocery there. The understanding is one of respect, not payment. And the reminder was effective. Marco flexed his hand. Persuasive. But they're getting loud. Elara. With Leo gone, they think the mantle is unclaimed. They don't understand. He trailed off, looking at her. They don't understand that the mantle isn't about who shouts the loudest. She finished for him. It's about who listens the most carefully. She placed the glass down with a quiet, definitive click. Increase the presence around the Varelli's usual haunts. Not muscle. Eyes. I want to know who they're talking to, where they're getting their confidence. Someone is whispering in their ear, making them bold. Find the whisper. Marco nodded, drained his espresso, and stood. The entire exchange had taken less than a minute. To anyone else, it was a customer having a quick coffee with a pleasant cafe owner. As he left, Elara's phone, a vintage model that only connected to a select few numbers, buzzed once. A single code word appeared on the screen. Settled. A breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding escaped her lips. It was from the fisherman. Leo was settled in his new, temporary home. A small island off the coast, a place of fog and quiet. The empire was fractured, but the core, the kingpin, was safe. And as long as he was safe, she could hold the line. She could be the quiet center around which the storm raged, using whispers, not warnings. Subtlety, not strength. She looked out the window at the rain. It was the same rain that had hidden Leo's escape. It was the same rain that now washed her city clean. She found the rhythm of it calming, a steady, patient rhythm. The rhythm of a long game? Chapter 3. The island of mists and memory. Leo's world had shrunk to the sound of waves and the cry of gulls. His shelter was a small, stone-walled cottage on the leeward side of the island, supplied with enough non-perishables for months. There was no electricity, only lanterns and a well for water. The book from the crate had been a volume of ancient philosophy. He'd read it twice. His days fell into a monastic rhythm. He would wake with the sun, meditate on the rocky shore, fish for his lunch, and spend the afternoons walking the circumference of the island, his mind unraveling the knot of his own downfall. He replayed every move, every alliance, every decision that had led him from the top of the world to this isolated rock. The betrayal had come from Sal, his oldest friend, his brother, in arms. The why of it was a festering wound. Greed, power, or something else. Leo sifted through the memories like evidence. A misplaced comment here, a strange absence there. The puzzle pieces were all there, but his anger had prevented him from seeing the picture. Here, in the immense quiet, the picture began to form. It wasn't just Sal. It was a systemic rot he'd been too busy to notice. He'd been playing checkers while his enemies, and his so-called friends, were playing chess. He had ruled through fear and favor, but he had neglected to inspire loyalty. Elara had tried to warn him. Loud loyalty is often the first to flee, she'd said. He hadn't listened. One evening, as a fog so thick it felt, like walking through clouds, rolled in from the sea, he sat on a stump outside his cottage, whittling a piece of driftwood. The action was mindless, soothing. The only sound was the scrape of his knife and the distant, mournful groan of a foghorn. In that blanket of silence, a memory surfaced, clear and sharp. A party, months ago. Sal, laughing, clapping him on the back. But his eyes had been over Leo's shoulder, watching a new player in the city, a sophisticated export businessman from the continent, a man named Vogel. Leo had dismissed Vogel as a legitimate, if ambitious, entrepreneur. But Sal's look wasn't one of casual observation. It was one of calculation, of recognition. The pieces clicked. Sal hadn't acted alone. He'd made a new partner. A quiet partner with deep pockets and cleaner hands. This wasn't a simple coup. It was a hostile takeover. The empire wasn't just being broken. It was being bought. Leo stopped whittling. The fog pressed in, but for the first time, his mind was clear. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, focused purpose. Escape was only the first step. This wasn't his end. It was his reset. He was no longer the loud lion. The mist and the sea had washed that man away. What was emerging was something different. Something patient. Something quiet. He looked out into the impenetrable gray. Somewhere out there, in the world beyond the fog, Elara was holding the remnants of their life together, and Vogel and Sal were enjoying their victory. Let them get comfortable. Let them think they'd won. Leo went inside, lit a lantern, and opened the philosophy book again. But tonight, he wasn't reading for solace. He was reading for strategy. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. He turned the page. All warfare is based on deception. A quiet kingpin. In a silent cottage, on a forgotten island, began to plan his return. Not with a roar, but with a whisper. Chapter 40. The Web of Whispers Back in the City. Elara moved through her days with the same serene precision. The café was her monastery and her command center. The morning rush had faded into a lazy afternoon lull. A university student was asleep in an armchair, a book open on her chest. An old man was meticulously working through a crossword puzzle. Elara was polishing the intricate brass of the espresso machine, her movements rhythmic and soothing. Each circular motion was a step in her own meditation. The information from Marco had been the first thread. Now, she began to gently pull on it. She picked up the phone to call her head pastry chef. The conversation was about the next day's delivery of flour and the need for a specific type of Belgian chocolate. To anyone listening, it was pure business, but woven into the mundane details were instructions. The flour delivery truck, which had a contract with the café, also made deliveries to several restaurants in the Vogel family's territory. The driver, a man named Benny who owed Leo a life debt from a past nobody spoke of, had a good ear and a better memory. Later, a woman came in to fix a leaky faucet in the back. She was a licensed plumber, but her real talent was for installing listening devices, so subtle they were virtually undetectable. She spent an hour under the sink, her tools clinking softly. When she left, the leak was fixed, and the café's security, against both electronic and physical intrusion, was significantly enhanced. The plumber's invoice, left on the counter, contained a list of parts used. The third digit of each part number, when read in sequence, formed a phone number. Elara memorized it and disposed of the invoice. The web was made of such ordinary silk. The mail carrier, the florist who supplied the café's weekly arrangements, the bike courier who brought specialty teas, all were nodes in her network. They weren't hardened criminals. They were people who valued the peace Elara's influence provided in their neighborhoods, and they repaid that peace with quiet observation. The whispers came back to her, collated and cross, referenced in her mind. The Vogel boys' new confidence was indeed funded. They were flashing new money, buying rounds at bars, talking big. The source was vague, a foreign investor. But more telling was the change in their operations. Their old, brutish shakedowns had been replaced by something more sophisticated. They were offering security contracts to businesses, using legal-looking paperwork. This was not Sal's style. Sal was a bludgeon. This was a scalpel. This was Vogel's style. The name emerged from the whispers like a shape from the fog. Klaus Vogel, German, ostensibly in renewable energy. A man who wore suits more expensive than cars, and who believed violence was a failure of imagination. He was the whisperer. He had seen a fractured empire and had decided to buy the pieces at a discount. Using Sal's insider knowledge and the Vogel's muscle to do it, Elara felt a cold clarity. This was no longer a street war. It was a corporate raid, and it required a corporate response. She went to a specific bookshelf in the café and pulled down a heavy, leather-bound copy of Moby Dick. Inside, hollowed out, was a secure satellite phone. She typed a single, coded sentence and sent it out into the ether, towards a small island shrouded in mist. The message was simple. The wind blows from the east. The hawk circles the dovecote. It meant the threat was external and sophisticated, and that their assets were under surveillance. Chapter 5. A message in the method on the island. Leo received the message on a similarly encrypted device, charged by a small solar panel. He read Elara's words and felt a grim satisfaction. His deduction in the fog had been correct. Vogel. It was a name to fit to the enemy, a focus for his purpose. He couldn't respond with force. He couldn't even show his face. His power had to be projected through influence, through the mere idea of him. He had to become a ghost that haunted Vogel's and Sal's every move. He thought of Sal. His weakness wasn't greed, it was pride. Sal had always lived in Leo's shadow, and he craved the recognition, the respect. He would want to be seen as the new master, the smarter, stronger successor. He would be holding court, enjoying his victory. Leo devised a message. Not a threat, but a reminder. A seed of doubt. He spent a day carefully, selecting a specific type of smooth, gray beach stone. That night, by lantern light, he used a needle and a drop of his own blood mixed with ash to paint a tiny, almost invisible symbol on it, a lion, dormant, its eyes closed. It was his old symbol, from when they were boys starting out, a sign they used to mark territory they considered under their protection. A sign only Sal would recognize. The next morning, the same old fisherman who had met him in the rain arrived on the island with supplies. He said nothing, simply handed over a crate of canned goods and fresh washwater. Leo palmed the painted stone to him. For the boss's son, Leo said quietly. A paperweight. For his new desk. The fisherman's eyes flickered with understanding. He nodded. The stone traveled back to the mainland. It passed through 3 more hands, a chain of silent, trusted couriers. It ended up in the pocket of a young woman who worked as a cleaner in the sleek, modern office, building where Sal had set up his new headquarters. She was cleaning Sal's immense, new mahogany desk late one evening. She dusted the surface, polished it, and as she left, she placed the smooth, ordinary, looking gray stone squarely in the center of the blotter. It looked like it belonged there, a piece of a collection. The next morning, Sal arrived, brimming with self-importance. He hung up his coat, sat in his expensive leather chair, and saw the stone. He picked it up, frowning. It was just a stone. Then he saw it, the tiny, faded symbol. His sleeping lion. His blood ran cold. The arrogance drained from his face, replaced by a superstitious dread. It was impossible. Leo was gone, vanished. Probably dead in a ditch somewhere. This was a joke, a trick. But who knew the symbol? Who knew its meaning? He spun in his chair, looking out at the city skyline he now believed he owned. But suddenly, it felt alien. He felt watched. The solidity of his victory turned to sand. Leo wasn't just gone, he was everywhere. He was in the very air. The message was received. It was not a message of vengeance, but of presence. I am still here. I see you. The loudest message was the one never spoken aloud. Chapter 60, The Unwinding with the Seed of Doubt Planted in Sal. Elara began her work. Vogel's strategy was based on a facade of legitimacy. He was using shell companies, legal pressure, and financial leverage to quietly acquire the assets of Leo's empire. Elara's counter-attack was to quietly unravel the threads of those deals. A city inspector who frequented the café and whose daughter's tuition was anonymously paid for after a sudden crisis found a number of irregularities in the permits for a warehouse Vogel was trying to acquire. The sale was delayed indefinitely. A data entry clerk, whose brother had been spared a brutal beating years ago on Leo's personal order, accidentally corrupted a key server housing the legal documents for another takeover, forcing weeks of delays. An accountant. A quiet man who loved the peace of Elara's café looked over the financials of Vogel's primary shell company. He found a pattern, a tiny, deliberate flaw. A ghost in the machine that Elara had subtly hinted he should look for. He reported it to the relevant and anonymous authorities. A quiet audit was launched, freezing Vogel's liquid assets. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. There were no explosions, no dramatic shootouts. Businesses that were supposed to seamlessly transition to Vogel's control found themselves mired in bureaucratic nightmares, mysterious technical failures, and sudden, unaccountable drops in revenue. Vogel, a man who appreciated order and efficiency, was driven to distraction. His perfectly laid plans were being stymied at every turn by chaos and incompetence. He couldn't identify an enemy to fight. He yelled at Sal, who was himself growing more paranoid and erratic, jumping at shadows, seeing Leo's hand in every minor setback. The Varelli boys, denied the steady flow of cash and direction they'd been promised, grew impatient and sloppy. They tried to revert to their old, brutal ways, shaking down a shop owned by the cousin of one of Marco's men. Marco's response was swift, clinical, and final. It did not look like a gangland hit. It looked like a tragic gas leak explosion in the Varellis' favorite social club. The message to the rest of the city was clear. The old rules still applied. The quiet hand was still the strongest. The empire was not being won back with a battle. It was being gently, insistently reclaimed. One whisper, one favor, one perfectly placed stone at a time. The balance of power, once thought shattered, was slowly, silently shifting back. The rain continued to fall on the city, washing the streets clean, hiding its secrets, and masking the sound of a quiet kingpin's return. Chapter 70. The visit weeks bled into months. In the city, Klaus Vogel sat in a sterile, minimalist apartment high above the glittering streets. A glass of expensive mineral water untouched on the table before him. The reports on his tablet were a litany of frustrations. Delays, unexplained errors, regulatory hurdles. It was chaos, an irrational, infuriating chaos that defied his meticulous logic. He had chosen Sal for his local knowledge, his brute force capability. But Sal had become a liability, jumpy, paranoid, drinking too much. He'd started ranting about ghosts and messages from the past. Useless. Vogel was a man who believed in systems, in cause and effect. Every effect had a cause. This widespread, coordinated disruption was not random. It was a cause with a single, brilliant, hidden source. The source, he had finally concluded, was not Sal's pathetic rival, the supposedly dead Leo Mantoni. It was the woman, the quiet one with the café, Elara Vesper. His intelligence, once he'd stopped looking for thugs and started looking for patterns, pointed squarely to her. She was the constant, the node, the calm in the center of the storm he was trying to weather. She did not command, she influenced. She did not threaten, she arranged. It was a form of power he could intellectually appreciate, even as he sought to crush it. He decided to pay her a visit. Not to threaten, but to assess. To understand the mechanism of his opponent. The bell above the door of the Whispering Bean chimed softly. It was late afternoon, the quiet hour. Vogel entered, a stark contrast to the warm, book-lined comfort of the place. He was a blade in a velvet room. He wore a charcoal gray suit that whispered of money, and his eyes, pale blue and cold, scanned the room not for threats, but for data points. Elara looked up from arranging a bouquet of lilies in a vase behind the counter. Her expression did not change, but her entire being focused, like a safe whose tumblers had just begun to click into place. She knew who he was instantly. He had the air of a man who owned the air he breathed. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice a smooth, warm melody. "What can I get for you?" Vogel offered a thin, perfunctory smile. "An espresso, please. And a moment of your time, Miss Vesper." "Of course. Please, take a seat." She gestured to the stool at the counter directly before her. It was a position of observation for both of them. She turned to the machine, her movements economical and graceful. The hiss of steam, the grind of beans, the gentle tap of the portafilter. It was a small symphony of routine. She placed the small porcelain cup and saucer before him. The espresso was perfect. A dark crema on top with a single, tiny bubble. The occhio del caffè, the eye of the coffee. Italians considered it a sign of quality and good luck. Vogel ignored it. "You have a lovely establishment, a haven of peace." "Thank you," Elara said, wiping the already spotless counter with a cloth. "I believe the world has enough noise." "Indeed." He steepled his fingers. "It is a philosophy I share. I prefer order, predictability. It is the foundation of true progress." "A solid foundation is important," she agreed neutrally. "Yet, the city seems to be experiencing unpredictability, delays, confusion. It is inefficient." He watched her closely, a scientist observing a reaction. Elara's face remained a mask of polite concern. "How unfortunate. I'm sure it's just a temporary ailment. The city has a rhythm. It finds its balance. Does it?" Vogel's voice was like ice. "Or does balance require a hand to guide it? A quiet hand." Their eyes met. The challenge was laid bare, stripped of pretense. The café was empty, but for the sleeping student in the corner, lost in dreams. "Some things cannot be forced," Elara said, her voice losing none of its softness, yet gaining a core of steel. "Like a good espresso, the water must be the right temperature, the grind must be precise, the tamp must be even. Force it, rush it, and you get bitterness. You must understand the process. You must respect it." She was no longer talking about coffee. Vogel leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. "And if one acquires the best machine, the best beans, should one not expect the best results?" "You can own the machine," Elara said, holding his gaze. "But that does not mean you know how to use it. And without that knowledge, you will only ever make a loud, bitter mess." The insult was delivered with the gentle grace of a queen. Vogel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He had come to assess a business rival and found himself facing a philosopher, queen defending her kingdom. He realized, with a cold shock, that he could not buy her, could not threaten her. She was anchored in something he did not understand: respect, loyalty, a sense of place. He stood up, leaving the espresso untouched. "Thank you for the conversation, Ms. Vesper." "Of course," she said, her smile never wavering. "The espresso is on the house. Perhaps another time." Vogel turned and left, the bell chiming his exit. The air in the café, which had grown taut and still, slowly returned to its warm, easy rhythm. Elara picked up his full cup and poured it down the sink. The perfect espresso, wasted on a man who only understood the price of things, not their value. The visit had told her everything she needed to know. Vogel was intelligent, But he was arrogant. He saw the world as a system to be dominated. He did not understand that the most powerful systems, a community, a city, a network of loyalty, were living things. They could not be dominated. They could only be tended. She knew his next move. Frustrated by the subtle, untouchable nature of her defense, he would revert to what he understood as force. But it would be a foreign, clumsy force. And clumsy force, in her city, made a very loud noise. She picked up her satellite phone and sent a single word to the island. A word that meant the final act was beginning. Foglift. Chapter 80. The quiet reckoning. The message arrived as Leo was watching the real morning fog burn away under a weak sun. Foglift. It was time. The period of hiding, of patient strategy, was over. Vogel had shown his hand by approaching Elara directly. The threat was now immediate and personal. Leo's return was not an invasion. It was an arrival. The same fisherman who had first brought him to the island now took him back, the boat cutting through a calm, gray sea. Leo looked different. The time in isolation had stripped the sharp, edged, loud ambition from him. His face was leaner, his eyes quieter, but his presence was more substantial. He was no longer a roaring lion. He was the deep, silent earth the lion walked upon. He went not to a safe house or a fortress, but to a place of pure memory. A small, nondescript social club in the old neighborhood, a place that smelled of cigar smoke and old wine. It was where his father had taken him as a boy. It was where he and Sal had dreamed their dreams as young men. He sent a single message, not to Sal, but to Vogel, an invitation. A time, a place, no threats, no demands, just a request for a conversation. Vogel, arrogant and frustrated, accepted. He believed he could still control this, that he could face this ghost from the past and dismiss him. That evening, Vogel arrived at the social club with 2 large bodyguards. They were stopped at the door by Marco, who was now wearing a simple doorman's jacket. Marco looked at the bodyguards, then at Vogel, and shook his head slowly, a faint smile on his face. "Not in here," Marco said, his voice soft but absolute. "This is a place for conversation." Sneering, Vogel dismissed his men. He entered alone. The room was dim, lit by a single green, shaded lamp over a felt-topped card table. Leo sat there in a pool of light, playing a solitary game of chess. He did not look up. Vogel stood across from him. "Mantoni. The ghost returns. I must admit I am impressed by the theater. But the show is over. You have nothing." Leo moved a bishop, capturing a knight. "I have this room," he said, his voice low and even. "I have this table. And I have your attention." Finally, he looked up. His gaze was not angry. It was pitying. "You made a mistake, Vogel. I have made no mistakes. I have acquired assets." "You acquired a traitor." Leo corrected him gently. "And you never asked why he betrayed." "Sale didn't betray me for money. He betrayed me for your respect. He wanted to be a king, but you." Leo gestured around the simple, shabby room. "You don't want to be king of this. You want to be CEO of it. You don't understand the kingdom. You just want to liquidate it." He stood up and walked to a sideboard, pouring 2 small glasses of amber liquid. "You went to see Elara? You thought she was the key. You were right. But you thought the key was to be turned or broken. You didn't understand that she is the lock, and the door, and the house that surrounds it." He handed a glass to Vogel, who took it reflexively. "Where is Sal?" Vogel asked, his confidence beginning to crack under the weight of Leo's calm certainty. "Sal is where traders belong," Leo said, taking a sip. "In the past been dealt with not by me, by the city. The shopkeepers, the delivery drivers, the people whose peace you disturbed. They just stopped seeing him. He became a ghost. Long before I did. The horror of it dawned on Vogel. This wasn't about crime. It was about community. He had tried to buy a family and found it was not for sale. My lawyers," Vogel began, "are already being investigated for their role in your shell companies," Leo finished. "The audit is public now. Your assets are frozen. Your reputation is in tatters. You have nothing left to acquire." Vogel stood there, a master of finance and strategy. Realizing he had been utterly and completely defeated not by a greater criminal, but by a better leader, he had been outmaneuvered by whispers and quiet loyalty. "What happens now?" Vogel asked, the arrogance finally gone from his voice, leaving only a hollow shell. "Now," Leo said, setting down his glass. "Now you leave. You get on your private jet, the one you somehow still have fuel for, and you go back to Germany. And you never think of this city again. Because if you do..." Leo's voice dropped to a whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. "I won't need to find you. The city will tell me, and the next conversation will not be over a drink." It was not a threat. It was a fact. Vogel left without another word. The next morning, he was gone. Leo stood by the window of the social club, watching the first light of dawn touch the cobblestones. The rain had started again, a gentle, cleansing rain. Elara stepped out of the shadows and came to stand beside him. She slipped her hand into his. They did not speak. They did not need to. The empire was not reclaimed with a roar, but with a quiet reckoning. The loudest kingpin was gone, replaced by a quieter, wiser one. And the city, under the gentle, steady fall of the rain, settled back into its peaceful, protected rhythm. The story was not over, but its loudest chapters were written. The rest would be a long, quiet, and peaceful tale.